There are certain kinds of men power recognizes too late. Not because they are loud. Not because they demand attention. But because they carry themselves with a kind of silence that only comes from surviving things most people could never imagine. On a dry Thursday evening in late September, just outside the town of Mercer Ridge, a black SUV rolled along County Route 19 under a fading orange sky. The road cut through miles of flat pine country, with long empty stretches, abandoned billboards, and utility poles leaning at tired angles over the highway. It was the kind of road where people drove fast, minded their own business, and prayed they didn't need help if something went wrong. Behind the wheel sat a man named Isaiah Vance. He looked, at first glance, like someone trying very hard not to be noticed. Mid-40s, broad shoulders, clean haircut, dark gray Henley shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow. One hand on the wheel, the other resting lightly near the center console. His face was calm, unreadable, with the kind of stillness that made people either trust him instantly or become deeply uncomfortable around him. The SUV itself was older than most people expected a man like him to drive. It wasn't flashy. No vanity plate. No polished rims. Just a dark, well-maintained vehicle with military precision in the way it had been cared for. Isaiah had been on the road for nearly 4 hours. He was headed to Mercer Ridge for a private reason, one no one on that highway could have guessed. He was going to visit the widow of a man who had once saved his life in a mountain village on the opposite side of the world. Sergeant Eli Mercer had been dead for 8 months. The town had been named after Eli's grandfather. The widow still lived there. She had written Isaiah a letter 2 weeks earlier, brief and restrained, saying there was something her husband had left behind that belonged in his hands. Not in a drawer, not in a museum, and not with the government. Isaiah hadn't called ahead. He rarely did. He believed some conversations deserved to happen face to face. What he didn't know was that just 6 miles outside town, another man in uniform had already decided the evening needed entertainment. Officer Brent Holloway had been with the Mercer Ridge Police Department for 6 years. He was the sort of small-town cop who had confused a badge for a personality. 32 years old, broad through the chest, sunglasses still on even with the sun nearly down. He sat half-reclined in his patrol cruiser in a dirt pull-off near the highway, scrolling his phone with one hand and sipping melted gas station soda with the other. Brent liked power in its cheapest form. He liked traffic stops where no one complained. He liked making people nervous. He liked the tiny pause in a civilian's voice when they realized he was enjoying himself. In another department, under another chief, Brent might have already been disciplined into irrelevance. But Mercer Ridge was the kind of place where a sheriff's nephew became a sergeant before he learned restraint, and an officer like Brent could coast on reputation, bluff, and the silence of men who didn't want paperwork. He noticed Isaiah's SUV first because it didn't fit the pattern. Out-of-county plate. Too clean for a local. Too composed behind the wheel. Brent straightened in his seat. He watched the SUV pass, then pulled out behind it slowly, leaving several car lengths of distance. He checked the speed gun just for formality. Isaiah was going 3 miles under the limit. That irritated him more than speeding would have. He followed for another half-mile, then smiled to himself. "Let's see what kind of day you're having," he muttered. Brent pulled ahead at the next passing break, then slipped off onto the shoulder as if checking something near the guardrail. He knew the road's blind angle. He knew how to make it look accidental. As Isaiah's SUV approached, Brent crouched near a patch of loose gravel and scattered road debris, palming a narrow steel spike strip section no longer than his forearm. It wasn't standard issue. It was something he kept for moments when he wanted a story to begin before anyone else knew they were in one. He flicked it with practiced ease into the edge of the lane. The black SUV hit it less than 3 seconds later. The sound was subtle at first, a harsh spit of rubber. Then the thump-thump-thump of a tire collapsing under weight. Isaiah's hands stayed calm on the wheel. He didn't jerk, didn't curse, didn't slam the brakes. He guided the vehicle onto the shoulder in one clean motion and let it coast to a stop. Brent smiled, stood, brushed dirt from his knees, then climbed into his cruiser and pulled in behind the SUV with the lights flashing. To Brent, this was the best part. The approach. The uncertainty. The moment before someone knew what kind of officer had stepped out of that car. He adjusted his vest, rolled his shoulders back, and sauntered toward the driver's side. Isaiah lowered the window halfway before Brent reached it. "Evening," Isaiah said. His voice was even, not submissive, not challenging, just steady. Brent leaned slightly toward the open window and gave a fake look of concern. "You know your rear tire's blown?" "I do now," Isaiah replied. Brent looked at him for a long second. No nerves, no fluster, no apologetic explanation, just those steady eyes taking measure of him in return. "You hit something back there?" Brent asked. "Looks that way. License and registration." Isaiah held the officer's gaze for a beat longer, then reached calmly into the center console, retrieved a wallet and papers, and handed them over. Brent glanced at the name. Isaiah T. Vance. No warrants flag in the quick return from dispatch. Valid license. Vehicle registered legally. No outstanding issues. Still, Brent wasn't finished. Men like him were never interested in being done when they hadn't yet gotten a reaction. "Where you headed?" Brent asked. "Mercer Ridge." "Business? Personal?" "What kind of personal?" Isaiah's expression didn't shift. "The kind that doesn't require explanation." "That did it." Brent smiled, but not kindly. "You don't seem to understand how this works, Mr. Vance." Isaiah glanced once at the flat tire, then back to the officer. "Seems pretty clear. My tire's ruined. You're asking questions unrelated to it." Brent bent slightly lower, resting a forearm on the door frame as if they were old friends. "See, around here I decide what's related." There it was. The line. The shift from procedure to performance. Most people would have adjusted their tone then, softened, explained themselves, tried to appease the uniform. Brent had built half his confidence on that reflex in others. But Isaiah didn't move. He looked at Brent the same way one might look at a barking dog behind a weak fence. Calmly, with no fear, but with full awareness that unnecessary aggression often came from fragile things. That silence agitated Brent more than profanity would have. He straightened and stepped back. "Pop the trunk." "No." Brent blinked. "Excuse me? You don't have cause." Brent's jaw tightened. "You refusing a lawful order?" "I'm refusing an unlawful search." For a moment the air between them changed. Cars hissed past on the highway. A crow lifted from the power line overhead. Somewhere in the trees, cicadas were starting their evening noise. But right there on that shoulder, everything narrowed into a single fragile truth. Officer Brent Holloway had expected to dominate a stranded man. Instead, he had found someone immune to intimidation. And men like Brent were most dangerous when their authority failed in public. He took one step back and placed a hand on his belt. "Step out of the vehicle." Isaiah studied him. "Why?" "Because I said so." "Not good enough." Brent's face hardened. "Last warning." Isaiah opened the door and stepped out, not because he was complying with the spirit of the order, but because he had already calculated every angle of the road, the cruiser, the officer's stance, the weight distribution in Brent's hips, the dominant hand near the holster, the distance between them, the nearest passing headlights, and the probability that escalating this would end with local paperwork at best and a funeral at worst. He stood to his full height. Brent had been annoying through the window. Up close, next to the SUV, he suddenly seemed smaller than the authority he'd borrowed. Isaiah was not merely tall. He was built like a reinforced door. His posture was loose, almost lazy, but underneath it lived impossible economy. Not a gram of wasted motion, not an ounce of uncertainty. Brent noticed, and because he noticed, he grew meaner. "Hands where I can see them." Isaiah complied without comment. Brent circled him once in a slow performance, like he was searching for a reason to justify what had already become personal. His flashlight swept over Isaiah's boots, jeans, watch, forearms. Then Brent noticed the scar. A pale line just visible above Isaiah's collar, disappearing beneath the shirt. Military, he thought, or prison. Either way, he smelled a backstory and wanted control of it. "You military?" Brent asked. Isaiah said nothing, Brent stepped closer. I asked you a question. I heard you. And I'm not obligated to discuss my background on the side of the road. Brent let out a small laugh, the kind men use when they want nearby witnesses to believe they aren't angry. You got a real attitude problem. No, Isaiah said. You have a power problem. That landed harder than either of them moved. Brent's expression flattened. He looked around the empty road, saw no one close enough to matter, and made a decision that would ruin more than his own life. He shoved Isaiah once in the chest. It wasn't a full strike. It was the ugly little nudge of a man testing how far he could go before the world called it assault. Isaiah didn't stumble, didn't even tense visibly. He just looked down at Brent's hand, then at Brent's face. And for the first time that evening, Officer Brent Holloway felt a sensation he had spent years provoking in others. Uncertainty. It lasted less than 2 seconds. His ego crushed it. You want to play hard? Brent snapped. Fine. He reached for the handcuffs. What happened next was so fast Brent's mind failed to arrange it into fear until it was over. Isaiah turned half an inch. Not more. A shift of angle, a control of balance, a redirection of the wrist. Brent's cuff hand was suddenly trapped, his body folded off-center, his elbow locked against physics he didn't understand. He wasn't thrown. He wasn't struck. He was simply taken out of the position of power with humiliating ease. Isaiah held him there without apparent effort. No raised voice, no dramatics, no wasted movement, just a low, controlled sentence spoken close to Brent's ear. You put hands on me again, Isaiah said, and this will become the worst lesson of your life. Then he released him. Brent stumbled back, wide-eyed, hand flying toward his sidearm before shame stopped him. Drawing would mean admitting fear, and fear was the one emotion Brent had never allowed himself in uniform. He covered it the only way he knew how, by getting louder. You just assaulted an officer, he barked. No, Isaiah said. I prevented one. Brent keyed his radio with a shaking hand. Unit 7 requesting immediate backup. Highway 19 South Marker 6. Non-compliant suspect. Possible prior military. Officer safety risk. There was a pause. Dispatch answered. Copy Unit 7. Backup en route. Brent stepped away, breathing harder now, trying to recover the scene with volume and accusation. Isaiah remained near the SUV, hands visible, face unreadable, tire shredded beside him, evening wind tugging lightly at his shirt. Then Brent looked down, near the rear tire, half hidden in the gravel. One of the steel puncture prongs had bounced free and remained visible beside the shoulder. For one awful second, his heart dropped. Isaiah saw him see it. Neither man spoke, but the meaning between them was immediate. Isaiah now knew the tire had not burst by chance. And Brent knew that Isaiah knew. Backup was coming. A cover story would be needed. And somewhere under the officer's swelling panic rose a darker instinct. Who exactly had he stopped on that road? He didn't know yet. But before the night was over, Mercer Ridge would learn that Officer Brent Holloway had not stranded an ordinary traveler. He had humiliated a man whose name was spoken in secure rooms, whose record was mostly redacted, and whose silence had once terrified enemies on 3 continents. And that was before the federal calls started.
The first backup cruiser arrived 3 minutes later. Then a second. In Mercer Ridge, that alone was enough to draw attention. 2 patrol cars joining a roadside stop after sunset meant one of 3 things: drugs, violence, or an officer whose pride had been injured and needed witnesses. Deputy Caleb Rains stepped out of the first unit with the clipped, wary posture of a man already tired of everybody's drama. He was older than Brent by at least 10 years, a former county deputy transferred into town after a divorce and a career stall. He had the face of someone who slept lightly and trusted slowly. He wasn't brave in the cinematic sense, but he knew the difference between danger and ego, and that put him ahead of half the badges in Mercer Ridge. The second unit brought Officer Maya Torres, newer to the department, observant enough to keep her opinions to herself. She scanned the scene once and instantly noticed what Brent hoped no one would focus on: the blown tire, the distance between Isaiah and the officers, the absence of any visible threat, and Brent's flushed face. That told its own story. "What VE we got?" Caleb asked. Brent spoke first, too quickly. "Driver got belligerent. Refused orders. Resisted detainment. Put hands on me." Caleb looked to Isaiah. Isaiah stood still beside the SUV, not slouched, not puffed up, just composed. Even in the cruiser lights, he looked less like a suspect than a man waiting for children to finish inventing a lie. "Sir," Caleb said, "I'm going to need your side of this." "He punctured my tire," Isaiah replied, voice level. "Then tried to search my vehicle without cause. Then he put hands on me. I restrained him and released him." Brent gave a short laugh. "You hear this guy?" Maya's eyes moved to the shoulder near the ruined rear wheel. She saw the glitter of metal in the gravel. She didn't move toward it yet, but she saw it. Caleb did too. His gaze shifted, then returned to Brent. "You got a body cam running?" Caleb asked. Brent hesitated a fraction too long. "Battery died." Of course it did, Caleb thought. Maya lifted a brow. Brent had bragged just yesterday in the station kitchen that he'd started every shift with a full charge because citizens lie for sport. Now, suddenly, his camera was dead during a contested stop. Convenient. Caleb faced Isaiah again. "Sir, do you have identification on you?" Isaiah nodded once. "Officer Holloway already took it." Brent fumbled in his vest pocket and handed over the license like it annoyed him to touch it. Caleb shined his light across it. Isaiah Thomas Vance. The name meant nothing to him, but something else did. There was a small federal credential sleeve visible behind the driver's license when Brent pulled it free. Brent had folded it back quickly, maybe hoping no one noticed. Caleb noticed. "So let me see the rest of it," he said. Brent's jaw worked. "It's nothing. Let me see it." Brent reluctantly produced the other identification. It was not flashy. No giant lettering. No dramatic eagle seal meant for television. Just a dark credential wallet, worn, precise, and official in the quiet way real authority often is. Caleb opened it. His expression changed, but only slightly. Maya stepped closer. "What is it?" Caleb didn't answer immediately. The ID identified Isaiah as attached to a Department of Defense Special Operations Advisory Command under a title vague enough to conceal more than it revealed. Most local officers would have skimmed over it. Caleb didn't. He had once guarded a training convoy outside Fort Bragg in his younger years. He knew enough to know that vague federal credentials were often the ones people should fear most. He looked up at Isaiah with new care. "Your active duty?" "Retained under federal authority," Isaiah said. Brent cut in. "That doesn't change anything." He interfered with an officer. Isaiah turned his head just enough to face him. "You staged a roadside disablement and escalated when I didn't submit." Maya's eyes flicked to Brent. She had been unsure before. Now she was almost certain. Caleb closed the credential and handed both IDs back to Isaiah, not to Brent. That small act shifted the scene more than anyone admitted aloud. "Mr. Vance," Caleb said, "for now, I need everyone calm while we sort out what happened." "I am calm," Isaiah replied. Brent wasn't. He moved toward Caleb, lowering his voice in that false brotherhood cops used when trying to recruit someone into bad judgment. "This guy's military, sure, but he's acting squirrely. We should pull him in, search the car, figure out what he's doing here." Caleb stared at him. "On what legal basis?" Brent's face tightened. "Officer safety." That phrase doesn't mean whatever you want it to mean. Maya hid the smallest exhale. Brent realized, too late, that the scene had stopped revolving around him. He pivoted, desperate for traction. Dispatch can verify if the credential is legit, he said. Call it in. Already doing that, Caleb replied, though he hadn't yet keyed the radio. He didn't need to. Maya had quietly stepped to her unit and begun the process herself. She read the credential details over dispatch in a low voice, then waited. The night seemed to stretch. Headlights moved past in the far lane. Insects battered themselves against the flashing cruiser lights. Brent crossed his arms and rocked on his heels, trying to appear unbothered. Isaiah stood near the SUV with a stillness that made everyone else feel busier than they were. Then Maya's radio crackled. Unit 12. Confirm credential valid. Subject attached to Federal Defense Operations. Stand by. Her eyes lifted to Caleb's. Not fake. Not retired surplus paperwork. Valid. Brent muttered. So what? Doesn't make him king. No, Caleb said. Just means we'd better understand what kind of mess this is before we keep making it worse. A second transmission came through 30 seconds later, but this one wasn't routine. It had the tone dispatchers use when someone higher up is suddenly on the line. Unit 12, state whether subject is detained. Maya answered carefully. Negative. Roadside investigation only. Copy. Hold scene. You are requested not to escalate further pending callback. Caleb frowned. Requested by who? There was a pause. Then dispatch answered with visible discomfort in her voice. County operations says the inquiry came from federal liaison. All three local officers went still. Brent tried to laugh it off. Federal liaison? Over a traffic stop. But he didn't sound convinced. Caleb turned to Isaiah. Did you contact anyone? No. Then how? Isaiah glanced once toward the dashboard of his SUV. The vehicle did. Maya stared. Your vehicle? It sends a distress alert if it detects roadside disablement paired with hostile law enforcement engagement. Brent looked offended by the very concept. That's insane. Isaiah said nothing, because it wasn't insane, and within the next 10 minutes, Mercer Ridge was going to find out exactly how little they understood the man standing on that shoulder. Caleb walked to the rear of the SUV, crouched near the destroyed tire, and picked up the steel puncture prong with a gloved hand. Brent, he said quietly, want to tell me why this is in the gravel? Brent didn't answer fast enough. Maya came over, flashlight angled low. That's not road debris. No, Caleb said. It's not. Brent's mind raced. Deny. Deflect. Counter-accuse. Could have already been there. Could have been from construction equipment. Could have. It's clean, Maya said. No rust, no wear, no dirt baked in. It was placed recently. Brent turned on her instantly. You working for me or against me? She didn't blink. I'm working the scene. And now Brent knew he was losing it. He took a step back, looked toward the darkness of the highway as if he might still recover authority simply by standing near a cruiser. But the illusion had started to peel. Then the black SUVs arrived. Not police cruisers. Not county units. Two matte dark federal vehicles with no light bars and government plates. They rolled in without sirens, without fanfare, and stopped with a kind of precision that meant the men inside had already discussed contingencies. For individuals stepped out. No tactical gear. No visible weapons beyond what professionalism implied. Two in plain dark jackets. One woman in a fitted blazer. One older man in a windbreaker who looked so ordinary he became instantly the most dangerous person there. Brent stared. Caleb's stomach dropped. Maya straightened unconsciously. The older man approached first and showed a badge too quickly for Brent to process and too confidently for him to challenge. Special Agent Leonard Cates, he said. Defense Criminal Investigative Service, attached liaison authority. Which one is Officer Holloway? No one answered. They didn't need to. Brent's posture identified him at once. Kate's looked him over without warmth. Step away from your weapon and keep your hands visible. This is my scene, Brent snapped. No, Kate said. It was. You lost it. Isaiah hadn't moved. The woman in the blazer approached him, not with alarm, but with a kind of professional respect. Commander Vance, she said quietly. Maya caught the word. Commander. Isaiah gave the slightest nod. You got here fast. We were already closer than usual. Brent's head snapped toward them. Commander. The woman glanced at him only briefly. Yes. Caleb felt something cold settle at the base of his neck. Not because the title sounded dramatic, because it explained the stillness, the confidence, the lack of fear, the refusal to posture. This wasn't a decorated veteran coasting on old stories. This was someone current enough, important enough, and dangerous enough that a roadside alert had called in federal personnel before the county sheriff even knew there was a problem. Cates addressed Caleb and Maya with professional courtesy. We'll need statements from both of you. Separately. Immediately. Then he faced Brent. You, he said, are now under investigatory detention pending review of assault, misconduct, evidence tampering, and unlawful interference with a protected federal operative. Brent's face drained. Protected, what? He's not even undercover. Kate's expression did not change. You have no idea what he is. The sentence hit the road like a dropped blade. Brent's mouth opened, but no words came. Isaiah looked at him, not triumphantly, not even angrily, just with a kind of tired disappointment usually reserved for men who had mistaken cruelty for strength. And still Brent did not understand the depth of the mistake. Because his real disaster was not that Isaiah Vance had federal status. It was not that Isaiah had military credentials. It was not even that a staged tire puncture had now been physically recovered from the scene. His real disaster was this. Someone in one of the arriving federal vehicles had already recognized Isaiah by name before seeing his ID. Which meant the man Brent had harassed on an empty county road was not simply connected. He was known. The woman in the blazer turned to Caleb. You should know, she said in a low voice meant to be private, though Brent heard every word. Commander Vance previously led direct action units in theaters you'll never read about. He now serves in strategic field oversight. In plain English, officer, your colleague chose the wrong stranger. Caleb looked over at Isaiah again, seeing him differently now. Not just as a man trained to fight, but as one burdened by things the rest of them had the luxury never to learn. Maya asked the question Brent was too shocked to form. Delta, she said carefully. The woman looked at her, then at Isaiah. Isaiah answered for himself. Formerly. Formerly. Just one word. No boasting. No elaboration. But it landed like thunder. Even Brent, with all his arrogance, had enough cultural understanding to know what that meant. His mind flashed backward through every second of the stop. The tire. The sneer. The shove. The attempt to cuff him. A sick realization rose behind his ribs. He had placed his hands on a man who could probably have ended him in under 2 seconds and chosen not to. That was the moment the fear truly arrived. Not fear of paperwork. Not fear of suspension. Fear of proportion. He had mistaken restraint for weakness. Kate's motioned to another federal officer. Collect the puncture device. Photograph the tire. Secure all local body cam and dash cam footage. Brent stammered. My body cam died. Kate's looked at him. Then you'll enjoy the fact that the county traffic camera at marker 6 did not. Brent nearly stopped breathing. Maya's eyes narrowed. She hadn't known about the traffic cam. Brent clearly hadn't either. Now the whole scene shifted again. Because lies can survive opinion. They rarely survive footage. And that meant whatever game Brent had been playing on lonely roads outside Mercer Ridge was about to meet the one thing he feared more than stronger men. Evidence. Isaiah looked once toward the dark horizon, toward the town he had almost reached before all of this, then back to the officers, federal and local alike. I still need to make my appointment, he said. The woman in the blazer gave a small, respectful nod. We'll take you there. Brent stared in disbelief as the entire machinery of authority reorganized itself around the man he had tried to humiliate. Minutes ago, Isaiah Vance had been stranded by the side of the road. Now officers with badges Brent didn't outrank and agencies he didn't understand were treating him like someone whose safety mattered at a national level. And though the night had already turned against Brent, the worst part was still coming. Because the woman Isaiah was on his way to see had something in her house the Pentagon had once tried to classify. Something Sergeant Eli Mercer had hidden before he died. And whatever it was, Isaiah's arrival in Mercer Ridge had never really been personal. Not entirely. It was connected to something older, darker, and much more dangerous than one corrupt cop. By the time Isaiah Vance reached Mercer Ridge, the town had already begun to whisper. Federal vehicles did that. So did flashing lights disappearing down Main Street without county insignia attached. Mercer Ridge was the kind of place where news traveled faster than evidence and where the wrong version of an event could settle into local truth before facts had even parked. By 9 that night, someone at the diner had already claimed a fugitive had been caught on Route 19. By 9:15, it had become a cartel courier. By 9:30, according to a cashier at the gas station, the military had rolled in because a domestic extremist had been transporting weapons through town. Nobody guessed the reality. That a dead soldier had left behind a sealed package. That a decorated commander had come to retrieve it. And that one insecure local officer had crashed headfirst into something far larger than his own corruption. The house sat at the far western edge of town, where paved streets gave way to cracked county lanes and old pecan trees leaned over fenced properties like tired sentries. It was a modest white house with a porch swing and one lamp burning near the front window. No security gate. No camera system visible from the road. No sign that anything inside it mattered beyond grief and memory. But Isaiah knew better. He had been to too many quiet houses holding explosive things. Rachel Mercer opened the door before he could knock. She was in her early 40s, with the composed face of a woman who had spent months receiving condolences from people who didn't understand what had actually been taken from her. She wore a dark sweater and no jewelry except a plain ring on a chain around her neck. Her eyes landed on Isaiah first, then shifted to the federal personnel behind him, and then back. "I expected you alone," she said. "I was delayed," Isaiah answered. She took one look at his expression and understood enough not to ask on the porch. "Come in." The federal agents remained outside at Isaiah's request, though two positioned themselves discreetly near the road and tree line. Agent Cates didn't like it, but he accepted it. Whatever had brought Isaiah to Mercer Ridge clearly predated the roadside incident, and the presence of federal oversight now suggested the matter was active in ways locals would not understand. Inside, the house smelled faintly of cedar, coffee, and old paper. Photographs lined the mantel. Eli in uniform. Eli fishing with a boy from some church youth program. Eli laughing beside Rachel on a pier, wind tearing at his jacket. Eli in one photo with Isaiah, both younger, both harder, standing in front of a low concrete wall in a place deliberately blurred in the background. The photo had the strange emotional temperature common to military friendships. Neither man was smiling fully, but the trust between them was unmistakable. Rachel noticed Isaiah looking at it. "He never framed much from that part of his life," she said. "He didn't." He said most of those memories belonged in a locked box. Isaiah's eyes moved to her. "And this one?" She took a breath. "This one," she said. he said was proof that some men can come back alive without ever really returning. Neither of them spoke for a moment after that. Grief has a way of making ordinary sentences sound like testimony. Rachel gestured toward the dining room table. A long rectangular object sat on it wrapped in oilcloth, bound with black cord, and sealed with a strip of weathered tape. Beside it was a smaller envelope with Isaiah's name written in Eli's unmistakable block handwriting. Isaiah stepped closer. Every line of him changed, but subtly. No outward emotion, no dramatic intake of breath. Yet the atmosphere around him tightened, as if some older self had risen quietly to the surface. Rachel saw it. He told me if anything ever happened to him, she said, I was to wait 6 months. If no one official came with the phrase, he kept the 4th map, then I was to contact you personally. Not the military. Not the government. You. Isaiah looked up sharply. Did anyone come? Yes. His expression hardened. When? 3 weeks after the funeral. Rachel crossed her arms, not out of defensiveness, but as if bracing herself against the memory. 2 men. Civilian clothes. Polite voices. They said Eli had retained materials belonging to the Department of Defense. They asked if he'd left any papers, storage drives, field journals, coded notebooks, anything at all. They didn't threaten me. They didn't have to. They acted like a widow should naturally surrender whatever her husband died to protect. Isaiah's jaw flexed once. What did you tell them? The truth. That I didn't know what they were talking about. Did they believe you? No, she said. But they left. And the package? I had already moved it. He nodded once. Eli would have expected that. Rachel slid the envelope toward him. Isaiah opened it carefully. Inside was a single handwritten page. No greeting. No sentimentality. That was Eli. Just words. If you're reading this, I either ran out of time or somebody finally found the thread. Do not let them frame this as confusion, trauma, or post-service paranoia. I saw what I saw. I copied what I could. The 4th map wasn't a map. It was a route ledger. And if this reaches you, it means they know I kept proof. Isaiah's eyes moved faster now. Rachel watched his face, trying to read in it whether the words frightened him. They did. But not in a way most people would notice. He read on. You once told me the deadliest lies are the ones hidden inside classified truths. You were right. Some of the names in here are protected. Some should be. Some absolutely should not. If Mercer Ridge is where they cornered you, then this started earlier than I thought. Don't trust any cleanup team that arrives too eager. And don't let them bury it under patriotism. At the bottom of the page was one final line. Tell Rachel I was finally ready to come home. I just waited too long. Isaiah folded the letter once, slowly. Rachel looked away. He never told me what this was about, she said. Just that if the wrong people got it, it would disappear. And if it disappeared, then men who had spent years pretending to be heroes would keep getting promoted. Isaiah placed the letter on the table and rested one hand on the oilcloth bundle. The weight felt wrong for paper. Too dense. Too balanced. He untied the cord. Inside the wrapping was a narrow hard case, military grade, scratched and unmarked except for a faded inventory stamp sanded almost entirely away. Isaiah opened it. Rachel had not seen the contents before. Eli had forbidden it. Inside lay 3 things. A ruggedized, encrypted drive. A weatherproof field notebook. And a folded series of satellite printouts covered in handwritten route marks, dates, initials, and box coordinates. Isaiah's eyes settled on the maps first. He did not touch them right away. Rachel felt her pulse in her throat. What is it? He answered after too long a pause. Not what it looks like. What does it look like? A logistics trail. And what is it really? Isaiah exhaled once, long and controlled. It's a burial plan. Rachel went still. For a moment, even the house seemed to listen. A burial plan for what? She asked. Isaiah finally lifted the top sheet and spread it under the dining room light. The printout showed a chain of remote movement points across 2 foreign regions and 1 domestic transfer channel disguised under contract freight routing. The handwritten notes were in Eli's hand. The red circles were not military markings. They were human choices made after someone discovered what official paperwork was hiding. Black site transfer corridors, Isaiah said quietly. Unacknowledged detention routes. Off-ledger movements. Rachel frowned. Prisoners. He didn't answer immediately. Sometimes, he said. Sometimes evidence. Sometimes assets. Sometimes people the record later says were never there. Her face lost color. He died over this? He may have. There it was. The hidden truth. Not a stolen gold cache. Not a secret mission diary. Something worse. A record that suggested someone within or adjacent to authorized military contracting had concealed movements that never should have existed outside oversight. If Eli had copied enough to prove it, then his death 8 months earlier might not have been the random training accident the public report claimed. Rachel gripped the chair back until her knuckles whitened. You think he was killed? Isaiah kept his eyes on the documents. I think he saw a network. I think he copied part of it. I think the wrong people learned he'd kept proof. And I think your husband was too competent to die by the version they wrote. Outside, gravel shifted under tires. More vehicles. Kate's appeared at the front window first as a silhouette, then knocked once and entered when Isaiah called him in. But he wasn't alone. With him came a man in a dark overcoat Isaiah had not expected to see in Mercer Ridge. Colonel Adrian Vale. Rachel didn't know the name. Isaiah did. Everyone in certain circles did. Vale had spent 2 decades in the architecture of military logistics and contingency oversight, always one office removed from the things later described as regrettable miscommunications. He was intelligent, careful, and impossible to trap without documents. Men like Vale survived scandals by standing just beyond the edge of signatures. Isaiah's expression cooled by a degree. Colonel, he said. Commander Vance. Vale's tone was smooth, almost regretful. I heard you'd made an unscheduled stop. Isaiah didn't miss the wording. Not visit. Not arrival. Stop. How did you hear that so quickly? He asked. Vale gave the smallest smile. Things ripple. Kate's looked uncomfortable now. That told Isaiah plenty. The colonel had arrived fast enough to suggest advance notice or vested interest. Rachel sensed the room change. Who is this? Vale turned to her with polished sympathy. Mrs. Mercer, I'm very sorry for your loss. I worked adjacent to your husband's theater support chain. That's not an answer, she replied. No one missed the steel in her voice. Vale's gaze drifted to the open hard case on the table. That was the first honest reaction he had shown. It lasted less than a second. But Isaiah caught it. Recognition. So Eli had been right. Vale knew exactly what the package contained. I think, Vale said carefully, it would be wise if we transferred all recovered materials into secure federal custody tonight. There are classification concerns here you may not fully appreciate. Rachel stared at him. Interesting. Because until 10 seconds ago, you didn't know what was on that table. Vale met her eyes. I can make informed guesses. Isaiah finally spoke. No, he said. You can't. But you can recognize a threat when you see one. The room fell silent. Cates shifted his stance, suddenly aware that his role as liaison had become less stable than he liked. He looked from Isaiah to Vale, then to the documents, doing the math in real time. Isaiah turned one of the satellite sheets so the colonel could see the handwritten route codes. "I haven't said what these are," Isaiah said. "You walked in ready to contain them anyway, which means you already know." Vale's face remained controlled, but now the effort showed. "You're making assumptions." Isaiah looked at him the way a sniper might look at wind before a shot. "No," he said softly. "I'm eliminating them." Rachel stepped back from the table. All at once the night rearranged itself in her mind. The early visit from civilian men. The pressure. The secrecy. The training accident report that never sat right. The package Eli never explained. Her husband hadn't died carrying old war trauma. He had died with leverage. And now 2 different kinds of government had arrived at her house wanting to claim it. Vale clasped his hands behind his back. "Commander, think carefully before you turn this into something bigger than 1 dead operator and 1 grieving family." Wrong sentence. Catastrophically wrong. Because in one cold, elegant line, Vale had admitted the exact moral scale of his thinking. 1 dead operator. 1 grieving family. Containable. Manageable. Paperwork. Isaiah's face changed then, not toward anger, but toward something worse, decision. "You should leave," Isaiah said. Vale didn't move. "I can't do that." "You can," Isaiah replied. "You still have a narrow path where you walk out of this house without adding obstruction to whatever comes next." Cates finally spoke. "Colonel, with respect, if these materials imply unauthorized detention routing, this has crossed into mandatory interagency disclosure." Vale turned to him, displeasure surfacing at last. "Do not get dramatic on me, Agent. That was enough." Isaiah closed the hard case. "Rachel," he said, "do you trust me?" She answered instantly, "Yes." "Then this package stays with me." Vale took a step forward. At the same moment, every federal officer in the room stiffened, not because Isaiah reached for a weapon. He did not, but because they sensed how fast the temperature could change when the wrong man forgot himself around him. Vale stopped. He realized it too late, but not too late enough. Isaiah lifted the case and tucked Eli's letter inside his jacket. Then he looked directly at Colonel Adrian Vale and spoke the line that turned suspicion into active war. "If Eli died because of what's in here," Isaiah said, "I will pull every buried name into daylight." No one in the room doubted him. Not Rachel. Not Cates. Not Maya Torres waiting just outside the doorway with half the story and enough instinct to know the other half was bad. And certainly not Adrian Vale. Because Vale now understood what Brent Holloway had not on the roadside. He had mistaken silence for passivity. And Isaiah Vance was not merely a hard man with a title. He was the kind of man institutions feared when they could no longer predict which oath he was about to honor first. The story that reached the public later would be neat. Too neat. A local officer accused of misconduct during a traffic stop. A separate ongoing federal review into classified logistics irregularities. An unfortunate coincidence of timing. That was the version built for press briefings, legal insulation, and men in suits who preferred clean headlines to contaminated truths. But the real night in Mercer Ridge was nothing like that. It was messy. It was human. And for several unforgettable hours, authority itself seemed to split in half under the weight of what one dead soldier had left behind. After Colonel Adrian Vale was forced to leave Rachel Mercer's house, nobody slept. Not Rachel. Not Isaiah. Not Agent Cates. And certainly not Officer Brent Holloway, who by then sat in an interview room under temporary seizure of duty weapon, phone, and patrol access while internal investigators from the county drove in wearing expressions that suggested someone high up had already called ahead. Brent's hands would not stop shaking. At first he blamed anger. By midnight he knew better. Fear had found him fully. He had spent years cultivating a local reputation built on swagger, implication, and the assumption that nobody he mistreated had enough reach to matter. But now people with federal badges were walking through his station, taking evidence bags from shelves, requesting system logs, and asking questions in tones that made small-town authority feel like a child's plastic badge. He hated them for it. He hated Isaiah Vance more. But beneath the hate was something rotten, the dawning awareness that all his tricks looked ridiculous under professional light. His missing body cam, his inconsistent report, the recovered puncture device, the traffic camera footage Agent Cates had mentioned. Brent had built his power in shadows. And shadow people always panic when someone brings in better electricity. At 12:17 a.m., the county investigator placed a tablet on the interview room table and pressed play. The traffic camera had no audio, but it didn't need any. There was Brent's cruiser idling at the shoulder. There was Brent exiting, crouching briefly near the lane. There was the black SUV approaching. There was the exact moment the rear tire blew. There was Brent re-entering his vehicle and pulling in behind Isaiah like a man conveniently arriving at chaos he himself had staged. Brent watched in silence, so complete it became confession. The investigator paused the footage. "Want to rewrite your statement?" he asked. Brent licked dry lips. "That angle doesn't show intent." "Really? I was checking debris." "With a steel puncture device?" Brent said nothing. The investigator leaned back. "Here's the thing. If this was just you being stupid, you were already finished. But because of who you did it to, people are now asking whether you've done this before." And there it was. The question Brent feared most. Because yes, he had. Not always with spike fragments. Not always this clean. Sometimes it was probable cause, fabricated from odor claims. Sometimes intimidation. Sometimes roadside harassment calibrated for people unlikely to file complaints. He had chosen targets the way cowards often do, based on who seemed isolated. Now every one of those stops threatened to come back alive. Across town, Isaiah sat at Rachel Mercer's dining table with the hard case open again. A secure laptop connected to the encrypted drive through a Federal Bridge device Cates had reluctantly provided under documented protest. Maya Torres stood outside the room with two other agents, technically perimeter support, though everyone knew she stayed because she wanted to understand what kind of corruption could drag military intelligence, local police misconduct, and a dead operator into the same orbit. The drive took 14 minutes to decrypt under layered authentication protocols Isaiah still knew by instinct. When it opened, Rachel saw folder names she would never forget. Transfer confirmations, alt manifests, and signed overrides ledger 4. Isaiah clicked the last one. Inside were scans, location stamps, contractor references, and what appeared at first glance to be route authorizations for cargo. But not cargo. Humans. Some named. Some numbered. Some erased in one system and reappearing in another under sanitized designation codes. Rachel sat down slowly. "This is real," she whispered. "Yes," Isaiah said. Cates looked sick. It wasn't merely misconduct. It was architecture. A system of hidden transfer chains operating behind partial legal covers, some perhaps initially justified under black site doctrine years earlier, then extended, repurposed, or shielded beyond lawful scope by people whose careers had come to depend on no one pulling the wrong drawer open. And there, threaded through metadata and access logs, were names. Not all direct. Not all equally implicated. But enough to build a ladder. Contract officers. Regional coordinators. Review officers. And, twice, unmistakably, a veil attached to authorization review pathways that officially should never have touched such routes. Cates rubbed a hand across his face. "This goes far above local jurisdiction." Isaiah didn't look up. It also now overlaps homicide potential. Rachel stared at him. Eli. Isaiah nodded once. He copied this because he understood what it was. If they learned he kept a duplicate, then his death must be reopened from the assumption of targeting. The words were clinical. The meaning was not. Rachel closed her eyes. For months she had lived inside the fog of maybe. Maybe the accident report was true. Maybe grief had made every detail feel suspicious. Maybe the hollowness in her chest was searching for a villain because randomness was too cruel to accept. Now maybe was gone. In its place stood a worse truth. Someone may have needed Eli Mercer dead. At 1:03 a.m., Agent Cates received a call he took on the porch. Isaiah watched him through the window. The man's posture changed almost immediately. Pressure. When Cates returned, he carried it with him. There's a request from Washington, he said. Isaiah didn't ask from where. For transfer of all recovered materials to a centralized review team. Effective immediately. Rachel let out a humorless breath. That sounds familiar. It's standard when national exposure is possible, Cates said. No, Isaiah replied. It's standard when contamination wants distance. Cates held his stare. Be careful. I am being careful. You're being suspicious. Correctly. The agent looked at the documents, then at Rachel, then back at Isaiah. He was not a villain. That made the moment harder. Men like Cates often entered service believing process would protect truth if followed honestly. Nights like this forced them to confront how often process merely decided where truth was allowed to disappear. Finally, he said, I can buy you some time. Not much. Isaiah gave the slightest nod. That's enough. At the station, Brent Holloway tried calling Chief Darnell Pike. No answer. Then he tried the sheriff's office. No answer there either. He was not being protected. And for perhaps the first time in his adult life, Brent understood the sensation he had so often inflicted on others. Being left alone inside a system that suddenly found you expendable. At 1:41 a.m., county record staff began pulling stop histories linked to Brent's patrol log. At 2:05 a.m., a deputy from Internal Standards requested all complaint files, including those marked informal or unresolved. At 2:22 a.m., a woman from two towns over returned a voicemail she had left 11 months earlier claiming Brent had threatened her teenage son during a stop no report seemed to match. At 2:47 a.m., another driver was identified in dash footage showing Brent lingering suspiciously near a shoulder before a random tire failure. Pattern. That was the word spreading through the building now. Not incident. Not misunderstanding. Pattern. By 3:10 a.m., Brent's career was already an obituary waiting for daylight. But the larger war was still moving. Back at Rachel's house, Maya Torres entered quietly with a printout. You need to see this, she said. It was a county property map of Old Mercer Ridge utility land adjacent to a decommissioned National Guard freight annex 15 miles outside town. One of Eli's handwritten domestic transfer notations matched a warehouse designation there. Rachel frowned. There's nothing out there. Now. Maya said. Maybe not. Isaiah took the sheet. The old annex had been closed publicly 5 years earlier, then contracted, then partially sealed under storage reassignment. Perfect. A place boring enough nobody asked questions. Remote enough to move things quietly. Official enough to deter curiosity. Eli marked it for a reason, Isaiah said. Cates looked up sharply. You are not going out there. Isaiah stood. That was not a suggestion, Cates added. No, Isaiah said. It was fear phrased as policy. Cates bristled. You think I'm trying to bury this? I think you don't yet know who is. That ended the debate. Because everyone in that room knew two truths at once. First, Going to the warehouse before sunrise was risky. Second, waiting until morning might mean arriving after a cleanup crew. Rachel rose too. I'm coming. No, Isaiah said immediately. It was my husband. And that's exactly why you're not coming. The words were firm, not cruel. Rachel knew better than to fight the tone. It was the same tone Eli must once have used before stepping into danger without explanation. She hated it because she trusted it. Maya spoke before Kate's could. I'll go. Isaiah looked at her. She held his gaze. You need at least one local who isn't corrupted by chain pressure. And I know the land roads. Kate swore under his breath, then made the decision he'd been resisting all night. I'm going too. At 3:36 a.m., 3 vehicles moved out toward the old freight annex under minimal lights. The road narrowed into gravel, then broken pavement, then a fenced perimeter with one chain-link gate hanging partly open. The warehouse beyond sat broad and dark against the pre-dawn sky, a dead rectangle of government leftovers and faded stenciled numbers. Isaiah saw it first. Fresh tire tracks. Multiple. Not old. Not abandoned. Someone had been there recently. Inside the warehouse, the air smelled of dust, oil, and old rain trapped in concrete. Their flashlights passed over rusted shelving, pallet wraps, empty crate frames. Then they found the office. And inside it, the burn bin. Still warm. Too late. Or almost too late. Isaiah pulled on gloves and sifted through the top layer with brutal efficiency. Most documents had been fed through flame thoroughly, but cleanup teams are often rushed, and rushed people leave edges. He found one half-burned transfer stub. One contractor seal fragment. One partial signature line. And in the metal drawer beneath the desk, overlooked in haste, one sealed envelope. He opened it. Inside was a printed photograph. Eli Mercer standing beside 2 men near a freight pallet inside this very warehouse. One of the men was Adrian Vale. The other was Chief Darnell Pike of the Mercer Ridge Police Department. Maya stared at it in disbelief. Your chief. Kate's went cold. The connection snapped into place with horrifying ease. Brent Holloway's roadside games. A local department conditioned to silence. A chief tied to off-ledger facility access. A dead soldier. A colonel who arrived too quickly. A request from Washington to centralize and contain. This wasn't overlap. It was coordination. And Brent, for all his cruelty, had never been the mastermind. He had been what corrupt systems always breed at the bottom. A man who enjoys power because better-dressed men above him taught him that accountability was optional. Maya took out her phone to photograph the image. A sound stopped her. Vehicle engines. Outside. More than one. Isaiah killed his flashlight. So did the others. Headlights swept through gaps in the warehouse siding. Doors slammed. Voices. At least 4, maybe 6 individuals. Cleanup had arrived. And they had arrived before dawn, exactly as Isaiah feared. Kate's whispered, "We need to leave now." Isaiah shook his head once. Not empty-handed. He moved through the dark like he'd been made for places like this. No wasted sound. No dramatic gestures. Just quiet velocity. He crossed to a side catwalk, using shadow rather than speed, taking angle over the office entrance. Maya saw it and understood something she would later never fully articulate. Some men become legendary because of violence, others because of presence in it. Isaiah was the second kind. Below, the newcomers entered with flashlights and low voices. One said, "Check the office." Another replied, "Orders were to sterilize and go." Then a third voice spoke, irritated and unmistakable. Chief Darnell Pike. Maya felt her stomach drop. So it was true. Pike stepped into the office doorway and saw the disturbed burn bin. Then he saw the open drawer. Then, too late, he understood they were not alone. Isaiah dropped from the catwalk behind him without a sound. What followed lasted perhaps 4 seconds. No gunfire. No chaos. Just absolute control. Pike was disarmed, turned, and pinned against the desk before his men even processed movement. Cates and Maya surged from opposite cover points with drawn weapons and federal commands. 2 of the cleanup men froze. One reached and thought better of it. Another bolted toward the exit and ran straight into an agent who had remained outside on perimeter sweep. The room exploded not with violence, but with authority reversing direction. Federal. Hands where I can see them. Down. Down now. Drop it. Pike, face crushed sideways against old paperwork, tried to spit out denial. Isaiah leaned close and said quietly, "You should have stayed in town." Maya secured one of the men while staring at her chief in disbelief, so raw it almost became grief. Not because she had admired him, because she had normalized him. And realizing the people above you were dirtier than the ones below them always feels like discovering the ceiling has been leaking poison for years. By sunrise, Mercer Ridge was finished. Chief Pike was in custody. Brent Holloway's misconduct pattern was active evidence. Adrian Vale's name had moved from whispered insulation to direct investigative interest. Rachel Mercer had federal protection. And Eli Mercer's death was no longer an accident file. It was a homicide-adjacent review with national implications. 3 days later, the Pentagon did what institutions do best when forced into sunlight. It announced an internal task force, promised full cooperation, and pretended urgency had not been dragged from it by the dead. But some things could not be managed. The warehouse photograph leaked. Then came the stop footage of Brent puncturing Isaiah's tire. Then local complaints resurfaced. Then 2 contractors named in ledger for accepted limited immunity deals and began naming names. Careers ended. Quietly for some. Publicly for others. Brent Holloway was terminated, charged, and remembered in Mercer Ridge not as a strong cop or a tough one, but as the fool who picked the wrong man for amusement and cracked open an empire of rot. Chief Pike never wore a badge again. Adrian Vale resigned before indictment papers became public, though resignation did not save him from inquiry. And Isaiah Vance? He attended none of the press conferences. He sat instead in the Mercer Cemetery beside Eli's grave with Rachel standing a few feet away in mourning silence. The grass was wet. The sky was clear. Somewhere beyond the trees, a church bell rang once. Rachel looked down at the headstone. "You were right," she said. Isaiah didn't answer immediately. About Eli, she meant. About the accident. About the package. About how some truths wait in the dark until the wrong man gets arrogant enough to trip over them. Finally, he said, "I wish I wasn't." Rachel nodded, eyes wet but steady. "He thought you'd come." "I know." "He trusted you." Isaiah looked at the carved name of the friend who had once dragged him bleeding through mountain stone and laughed afterward like survival was ordinary. "I know," he said again. Rachel turned toward him. "What happens now?" Isaiah stood slowly. "Now," he said, "they spend years calling it an investigation." He looked toward the road beyond the cemetery gate. "But the truth is simpler than that." Rachel waited. He gave the faintest, hardest shadow of a smile. "They mistook decent men for disposable ones," he said. "And that mistake is finally costing them." Then he walked away from the grave, from the cameras that would later hunt him, from the headlines that would simplify him into myth. But Mercer Ridge never forgot the lesson. A cop had punctured a tire for fun. He thought he had stranded a stranger. Instead, he had stopped a man forged by war, trusted by the dead, and feared by the kind of officials who only tremble when secrets start growing witnesses. And in the end, it wasn't Isaiah Vance's violence that destroyed them. It was his restraint,